Nail him to the wood, and there is nothing left to do to him. No more pain anyone can add. No more rescue coming. The worst thing that can happen to a man has already happened, and that is the moment he chooses to speak. Not a groan, not a scream, one word. Watch the people standing there. Nobody reacts the way you'd expect. Because in English, his last word sounds like giving up. It is finished. That's the sound of a man admitting the end has won. The sound of someone laying down, done fighting, done trying. But that's not what he said. Not really. 4 English words are covering up one Greek word. And that word doesn't come from the world of surrender at all. It comes from a completely different place. The world of business, of debt, of law. It's the word you'd use to close a contract, to mark a job finished, to sign off on an account that has just been paid in full. So here's the question worth sitting with. What kind of word does a dying man reach for in his last breath that turns his own execution into something that sounds less like defeat and more like a signature on a closed deal? Here's what makes this stranger than it looks. That same word shows up one more time in this same chapter of the Bible, just 6 verses earlier, in his own mouth, before any of this happened to him. The word is Tetelestai. Tetelestai, John 19:30. It's the last thing Jesus says before he dies. And once you know it shows up twice, you have to ask why. To answer that, you need to know what crucifixion actually does to a body. It's easy to picture the cross as a slow bleeding out. That's not what kills a man. Crucifixion kills through breathing. Nailed by the wrists and feet, a man's chest starts to sag under its own weight. To take in air, he has to push himself up on those nailed feet, just enough to open his lungs. Every breath costs him. Every word costs more. That's why crucified men usually died quiet or died screaming, but rarely died talking. Speaking near the end meant fighting your own collapsing body just to push out sound. So when Jesus speaks his last word, it isn't a whisper slipping out. It's an effort. He has to lift himself on wounded feet to say it at all. Now look at when this happens. John tells us the time. It's the 9th hour of the day, which is around 3 in the afternoon. That detail sounds small, almost like a footnote. It isn't. Across the city, in the temple, that exact hour was when the priests slaughtered the Passover lambs. Every year, thousands of families in Jerusalem timed their lives around that hour. Anyone reading John's account in the original setting would have known this without being told. The lambs were dying at the temple at the very same time the man on the hill outside the city was dying too. John doesn't explain the timing. He just places it there, quietly, and moves on. Keep that hour in your mind. It matters more than it seems to right now. And look at who's actually there to see it. No crowd cheering, no disciples standing firm. Most of the men who followed him for 3 years are gone, scattered, hiding. What's left is a small handful of people who didn't run. His mother, one disciple, a few women who had followed him from Galilee. That's it. Not a victory scene, not even a proper funeral gathering, just a small group standing close enough to watch a man they loved die slowly, in public, unable to do anything to stop it. So picture the full scene. A dying man forcing his ruined body upward just to speak. A city across the valley slaughtering lambs at the same hour. A handful of grieving people standing at the foot of the cross, watching, waiting, unable to look away. This is the setting the word gets spoken into. Not calm, not private. A public execution, timed to the hour, watched by the few who stayed. Whatever Tetelestai means, it was said here, in this body, at this hour, in front of these people. By this point, Jesus had been on the cross for hours. Hours of his body sagging, hours of pushing himself up just to breathe, hours of his strength draining out with nothing left to replace it. John tells us he knew everything was already done. Not almost done, already done. And even knowing that, his body still had one more need it couldn't ignore. He says, I thirst. 2 small words, but even those cost him something. Someone nearby has a jar of sour wine, the cheap kind soldiers drank to get through a long shift. They soak a sponge in it, push the sponge onto a branch of hyssop, and lift it up to his mouth. It's not kindness exactly, it's just what was there. He takes it, lets the wine touch his lips. And then comes the moment everything has been building toward. To speak at all, he has to do it one more time. Push down on the nails through his feet, force his chest to rise, fight his own collapsing body for one more breath. And with that breath, he says one word, just one, not a groan, not a scream, a single, deliberate word, forced out through a body that had almost nothing left to give. Then something happens that the writer wants you to notice. John doesn't say Jesus' head fell. He doesn't say he slumped or collapsed or gave out. John says he bowed his head. That's a small choice of words, but it matters. A man who collapses has lost control of his body. A man who bows his head still has something left to decide, and he decides to lower it. Then John says he gave up his spirit. Not that his spirit was taken, not that it slipped away from him. He gave it up, handed it over, like something being released on purpose, not something being ripped out against his will. Sit with that for a second before we go any further. A man is stripped of everything, his strength, his breath, his body's ability to hold itself up. And in that state, John still describes his last actions as choices. He asks for the wine. He speaks the word, he bows his head, he gives up his spirit. 4 small, deliberate acts inside a death that should have looked like nothing but loss. That's the picture in front of you now. A man spent completely, forcing out one final word with whatever was left in his lungs. Whatever that word means, it did not come cheap. It cost him the last full breath he had. Here is the verse in full, exactly as it reads. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. 4 words carry the weight of the whole moment. It is finished. Let that sit for a second. Just those 4 words, sitting alone on the page, doing all the work of explaining what just happened to a man who had nothing left to give. 4 English words, one single word in the language Jesus actually spoke. And that gap between the 4 and the 1 is exactly where this gets interesting. So what is that one Greek word? It's tetelestai. Say it out loud and it sounds like tetelestai, tetelestai. It comes from a root verb, teleo, which means to bring something all the way to the end, to carry a task through to the finish, to pay off what is owed. Now here's where the grammar actually matters, so stay with this for a second. Greek has a verb form called the perfect tense, and it doesn't work like the English word perfect. It's not about doing something without mistakes. It's about a finished action that leaves behind a lasting result. English mostly talks about time in 3 simple buckets: past, present, future. Greek can do something English struggles to do in one word. It can say an action is fully done and at the same time say that its result is still standing right now, holding firm. That's exactly what Tetelestai is doing. It's not saying this is ending. It's not even just saying this ended. It's saying something closer to this has been brought to completion and it stays that way. Done and staying done. One word carrying a whole sentence's worth of meaning. Now think about how this word got used every day, outside of any religious setting at all. Teleo was common, ordinary Greek. People used it when a builder finished a house, when a farmer paid off a debt to a landowner, when someone finally kept a vow they had made a long time before. It was the word for a job completed, a contract closed, an obligation cleared. Nobody hearing this word in daily life would think of dying. They would think of finishing something they had been working toward. That's what makes this word land so hard in the mouth of a dying man. It isn't primarily a word about death at all. It's a word about work being done, about a task carried all the way through to its end, with nothing left undone. Now go back to the English translation. It is finished. Read it again and notice what it sounds like. It sounds tired, passive, almost like something happening to him rather than something he is declaring. Like a man admitting defeat has arrived. But that's not what the single Greek word sounds like at all. Strip away the four soft English words, and what's left is closer to one hard word: accomplished. Not a sigh breathed out at the end of a losing fight, a declaration, a statement made on purpose by a man who still, somehow, in his very last breath, sounds like he's the one closing the deal. Remember what I promised you back at the start. This word shows up twice in this same chapter. Now it's time to go find the first one. Back up 2 verses, before the wine, before the final word. John writes that Jesus, knowing that all things were now Tetelestai, already accomplished, said, "I thirst." Look closely at the order there. John doesn't say Jesus asked for a drink because he was simply thirsty and nothing more. John says Jesus knew everything was already finished, and then he asked for the drink, so that one last piece of scripture would be completed too. Read that again slowly. The same word, tetelestai, shows up here first, describing something Jesus already knows is true before the wine ever touches his lips. Then it shows up again a few breaths later, this time out loud, as his own final word. Once naming what is already settled deep inside him, once spoken out loud for everyone standing there to hear. Same word, twice, 9 verses apart, wrapped around the exact same moment. That is not an accident of writing. That is a writer placing the same word carefully on both sides of a single event, like bookends holding the moment in place. Now step outside the Bible completely for a second and picture how ordinary this word actually was in daily Greek life. A builder finishing the last wall of a house would use it. A priest closing out a sacrifice at an altar would use it. A man finally clearing a debt he had owed for years would use it. A runner crossing the line at the end of a long race would use it. None of these people were doing anything religious or dramatic when they said it. They were just saying plainly, the job is done. That's worth sitting with. This wasn't some rare, sacred word saved only for holy moments. It was everyday language, the kind of word a builder shouted across a job site, the kind of word stamped into ordinary conversation used by ordinary people about ordinary tasks. And that's exactly why it hits so hard here. John didn't reach for some rare, mysterious term when he wrote down what Jesus said. He used the same word people use for finishing a house, or clearing a debt, or crossing a finish line. Plain language, spoken by a dying man, about the biggest thing anyone could ever call finished. So now you have 2 facts sitting side by side. The word appears twice in 9 verses, tying the whole scene together on purpose. And the word itself was borrowed straight out of ordinary, everyday speech. Which raises a new question. If this word is so plain, so ordinary, why do so many people claim it means something far bigger than the job is done? Here's where a lot of popular teaching gets ahead of itself, and it's worth slowing down and getting this right. You've probably heard this before. A preacher stands up and says that tetelestai wasn't just an ordinary word. He says it was actually stamped on ancient tax receipts and paid off debts, meaning paid in full. And the idea is that Jesus, hanging on the cross, was consciously borrowing that exact business term, like he was stamping a receipt on the debt of sin itself. It's a compelling picture. It's also not accurate. Scholars who went back and actually looked at the old paperwork this claim was built on found a problem. The word on those tax receipts isn't tetelestai at all. It's a different Greek word, spelled almost the same way, but not the same word. That other word was about paying customs tax at a border, not about settling a personal debt, and definitely not the word Jesus spoke from the cross. The receipt story sounds great in a sermon. It just isn't what the evidence actually shows. But here's the good news in all of this. You don't need that receipt story for the word to carry weight. Strip the borrowed illustration away completely, and what's left is still solid, completed, discharged, done. That's the plain, well-supported meaning of the word all on its own, backed by how it was used across ordinary Greek writing for centuries. No stamped receipt required. No borrowed business trick needed to make the point land. The word was already doing enough work by itself. So hold on to that. Not every popular claim about this word turns out to be true, but the core of it, the plain meaning sitting underneath all the extra decoration, still stands on its own 2 feet. If a video like this is helping you actually see the text you've read 100 times, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. And if you want to go deeper than a single video can hold, joining the channel is what keeps this kind of study going, free, for anyone who wants it. Now go back to that small detail from earlier, the hour. Remember, John placed this death at roughly 3 in the afternoon, the same hour the temple across the city was slaughtering the Passover lambs. That detail wasn't just background color. It was a clue, sitting quietly in the story, waiting for you to come back to it. And here's why it matters so much. Way back in chapter 1 of this same book, before any of this happened, a man named John the Baptist looks at Jesus walking toward him and says, "Look, the Lamb of God." Not a soldier, not a teacher, a lamb. That word gets planted early, and then the writer waits nearly 20 chapters to bring it back around. Now, at the exact hour the real lambs are dying in the temple, this one word, Tetelestai, gets spoken by a man the book already called a lamb. That's not a coincidence a careful writer lets slip by accident. That's a writer lining 2 pictures up on purpose. To feel the full weight of that, you need to picture what was happening in that temple every single day, not just on this one afternoon. Priests offered sacrifices morning and evening, every day, for years, for generations. Animal after animal, year after year, the exact same routine repeating without end. And here's the part that matters most. That system never had a finish line built into it. It wasn't designed to end. It was designed to keep going, because none of those sacrifices ever fully closed the debt they were meant to cover. The moment one sacrifice ended, the next one had to start, forever unfinished by design. Now set this moment against that backdrop. A man dies at the exact hour the lambs die, and instead of staying quiet like every lamb before him, he speaks. And the word he chooses is the one word that system could never say about itself. Not again. Not one more time. Finished. Completed. Done and staying done. That's the real weight sitting inside this single word. It isn't just describing one man's death reaching its end. Against the backdrop of a system built to repeat forever, this word is making a much bigger claim. Not, here is another sacrifice like all the ones before it. Something closer to, here is the one that ends the need for all the ones before it. Picture generations of priests walking the same steps, repeating the same offerings, day after day, because the debt never actually closed. And then picture one voice, at the hour the lambs are dying, saying the one word that whole system was never able to say for itself. That's the divergence worth sitting with. Not another repeat, the end of the pattern of repeating. Think about the last time you owed something real. Maybe it was a loan or a bill that had been hanging over you for years. You made your payments. You watched the number get smaller, month after month. But there's a difference between a debt getting smaller and a debt being gone. The real relief doesn't come while you're still paying it down. It comes the day a letter shows up or an email lands and it says the balance is 0. Paid, closed, nothing owed, not almost there, done. That moment does something strange to a person. You'd think it would feel like celebration, but mostly it feels like stillness. Like a weight you'd carried so long you forgot you were carrying it suddenly isn't there anymore. You check the number again just to be sure. You read the letter twice. Something that had been hanging over your whole life, unfinished for so long, is just finished. That specific feeling, closed, not closing, is the closest thing most of us will ever feel to what this word is claiming. Now hold that next to the actual scene on the hill. A man beaten past recognition, nailed to wood, struggling for every breath. By every visible measure, this looks like the worst kind of unfinished business. A life cut short, a body broken. Nothing here looks closed. Nothing here looks like a debt paid off. And yet, in the middle of all of that, one word gets spoken that means the opposite of everything the eyes are seeing. The text doesn't try to smooth that over. It doesn't explain away how strange it is for a word about completion to come out of a moment that looks like total loss. It just lets both things sit there, right next to each other. The wound and the word. Defeat and done. And that brings us back to where we started. The people standing at the foot of that cross heard four sounds that meant one thing to them. Giving up. The end. A man losing his final fight. But John, writing in Greek for readers who knew this word from job sites and business deals and finish lines, was recording something else entirely. The same breath, the same moment, two completely different things heard. Which one were you hearing before today? If this changed the way you read that verse, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. And down in the comments, tell me, did you grow up hearing the paid in full version? Or is this the first time you're hearing what the word is actually doing?